Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here to give you my final verdict today on the new Sigma 28mm F1.4. This is a DG, meaning it's full frame. HSM is hypersonic motor, and this is from their Art series. Now, as I mentioned in my first look episode, which I would recommend that you take a look at if you haven't already, but I mentioned in that 28mm is a focal length that was extraordinarily popular in ages past, film era, but has become less popular in the digital era, and kind of the standard focal lengths have become 24mm, 35mm, and then on to 50 and 85. 28mm was popular as kind of a walk-around focal length in the past, and it kind of bridges in between 24mm and 35mm. And so if you haven't used a 28mm focal length, you may find that it actually is a nice kind of general purpose focal length for your shooting purposes. Now, Sigma has designed a premium lens here that really is probably one of their top Art series lenses. And I say that because they have both in terms of the build and the manufacturing, the image quality, and also with the price. They have pushed towards the upper end of their scale. And so I will start on that note that at $1,399, this is a lens that will definitely put off some people, particularly when you consider the fact that it isn't an extraordinarily popular focal length, and so it's not one that people are automatically thinking. And even if they happen to be thinking of 28mm as a focal length, they may not be wanting to spend $1,400 to do it. Then again, the alternatives are even more expensive. And you have, on the Canon front, there is no 28mm f1.4. One's been rumored over the years, but never actually released. And then on the Nikon front, there is one, but it runs about $700 more expensive than what this does. It's about $600. And then, of course, you have on either Canon or Nikon, you have the alternative of the Zeiss Otis that retails for around $5,000. Now, on Sony space, of course, it does come in a Sony E-mount as well. There's not necessarily a direct competitor, although there is, of course, the new 24mm f1.4 G Master lens that some might consider as an alternative. Now, in that first look episode, I broke down the build and the design. And while this does look very familiar to those of you, those like myself that have handled a lot of the Art series lenses, this is one of their more premium options in terms of the overall build. The build is just a little bit higher grade, and it has more fully realized weather sealing. For example, it has not only a gasket, but as the diagram goes, it has some internal seals. It has a nicely built body. I also noticed that the focus system is a little bit more refined, and Sigma has been making, I think, progress on that front anyway. And so, but the focal length is it's a little bit faster and smoother and quieter than what of some of the earlier Art series releases were. And certainly it is it's a more smooth transition if you're going into kind of a mirrorless type platform. And that's true even on a Canon 5D Mark IV if I'm shooting in live view mode. And in live view, it just, the behavior of the focus is, it's more refined. It's quieter, it's extremely fast in live view mode. And I found that to be true when I adapted it to either Canon mirrorless, the EOS RP, where it functioned beautifully, and then also via the Sigma MC11 mount converter on my Sony a7R Mark III. In both cases, it really functioned spectacular. In fact, as far as autofocus goes, I even slightly preferred the mirrorless. And as I tried to clarify in my image quality episode, where I did touch briefly on autofocus, some people I think misinterpreted what I said. I did highlight one area where using my 5D Mark IV, where I was having a hard time getting it to focus on a certain object at a certain distance using traditional viewfinder AF. But I wanted to make a further point that mirrorless it more gives you the ability to focus at a lot more spaces on the frame, and so it gives you more framing options. I was less trying to make a point about any overall negatives of the autofocus, because truth be told, outside of that instance that I cited, autofocus performance has actually been very good. In terms of my focus accuracy, it's been very good. Focus is quick. It's confident in just about every situation that I've used it. And, I went out specifically the other day just kind of shooting real world objects, and, with the purpose of coming home and looking looking at, mostly f1.4 shots and examining how well focused they were. And what I found is that autofocus was actually extraordinarily effective and did a great job. I just like the mirrorless experience a hair more. Things like IAF, the mirrorless approach to focus is a little smoother, a little bit more refined, and it also gives you more options as to where you can focus across the frame. Now here, taking a look on the 5D Mark IV as terms of the smoothness of focus pulls for video, let's pause and take a quick look at that. So as you can see, it's working well for that front as well. Now, as far as the image quality goes, this is a really fantastic lens. The closest Canon comparison that I had on hand that I can compare it to, since there isn't a Canon 28mm, is their 35mm F1.4 L Mark II, which I consider to be Canon's best lens outside of the super telephotos. And I would say that the Sigma is a very, very close lens in that. It may not be as absolutely perfectly corrected special. I mean, that Canon lens uses this blue refractive wave optics in it that's an expensive technology that Canon really hasn't used hardly since. But, and so it may have just a hair more contrast, a hair less CA, but both things are really well controlled on this lens. It did a really great job in basically all of those metrics. I find that shooting at f1.4 is, it's a flawless experience basically. There's tons of contrast and resolution, and so it allows you that flexibility of actually using that f1.4 aperture for beneficial storytelling, depth of field purposes. And so very, very good image quality across the frame. I also noted that stop down, it is incredibly sharp. It worked well when I used it with filters, and some lenses, their resolution doesn't hold up when you're putting a kind of a long exposure ND filter on there, but I found that I had no problems with this lens on that front. I also was happy to find that after my IQ test, I had an opportunity to test coma on it and shoot the night sky. In times past, that's not necessarily been a strength for Sigma lenses, but I have noted some improvements in some of the more recent releases, and I'm happy to say that this is one of them, in that I found that coma was fairly well controlled even at f1.4. A little bit of kind of stretching of stars, but not necessarily the growing wings. And stopping down to f2, which of course is still advantageous compared to a lot of competing lenses, allowed you to get even better looking results. And so once again, not a whole lot to complain about there. The lens does show a little bit of ability to show flare in some situations. By the way, that's also true of the 35L Mark II. And so, part of the nature often, unfortunately, of having a lot of glass and a large maximum aperture. It's not terrible, but it's not perfectly controlled in that situation either. Overall, at the end of the day, though, I think that the sum total of this makes for a lens that really is one of Sigma's best, I would say, in the art series. Not everyone is going to be attracted to the focal length or to the price, but for those of you that are considering a 28mm lens, I really have no real negative to put you off from that experience. I think that it's a really excellent lens, and as I said, one of Sigma's best to this point. I will also note, just because it's worth noting, that not only does it perform well with all of the adapters, it also is supported with Canon's lens aberration corrections, and so you can get corrections of JPEGs in camera, and so that's just another asset there. And overall, as I noted, performance on every front is really quite good. So if you'd like to take a look at my written review and to get a little bit more details, you can find linkage to that in the description down below. And beyond that, there's also buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. And you can also find linkage there to follow me on social media, including now on Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter, become a patron, and if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.